Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. From the very beginning, the countries who send their immigrants to the United States have benefited far more economically than the United States ever has. But that's about to become a lot more difficult. Donald Trump's big, beautiful bill has a provision in it to increase the tax on remittances. Remittances is the money that immigrants send back to their folks in the old country. As for Donald Trump's big, beautiful bill, it's already passed the House, and if it passes the Senate, it would be a game changer in terms of making it where economic migration is no longer the tax-free ride that it's been for all these other countries. And it's not as if these other countries haven't noticed. Predictably, the president of Mexico has said that she would mobilize, whatever that means, if the U.S. starts taxing remittances. She sees a tax hike in the United States as being a personal and direct attack on Mexico, something that has nothing to do with her country. It would be hilarious if it wasn't so pathetic. It just goes to show how there have been these other countries getting away with murder on the U.S.'s dime for so many decades. Remittances have been nothing but a torrent of free money from the United States to these failed states. But a lot of that money goes to drug cartels and organized crime syndicates, because it's been nothing but free money for those criminals too. Not to mention that most of the people who are sending remittances are illegals, and they don't pay any taxes. So this is the only chance to make them pony up something. And people can get all up in their feelings if they want to, but Mexico is undoubtedly a failed state. It's certainly not a successful one. Who in their right mind would say that millions of people fleeing a country is a sign that the country is doing well? And its president, she's just another criminal trying to see how much she can skim off the U.S., though I do find it amusing that she says that Mexico would mobilize. Well, it'd be the first time in decades that they've gotten off their duffs. For decades, Mexico's presidents have tried to claim that the U.S. simply cannot do without illegal immigration, and that if the U.S. stopped, then it would only hurt America. Well, the orange man has called their bluff, and now the Mexican government is making threats. Seems the U.S. isn't the one who's suffering, and they haven't even had those tax hikes put on those remittances yet. Imagine how much louder they're going to be screaming after that takes effect. And this is going to affect not just illegal aliens, but also the legal ones too. People need to understand a reality here. Practically all the migration in the world is for economic reasons, no matter what the white media and certain interested activists may try to tell you. Most people lie and claim that they're trying to escape political or religious persecution, but in reality, the only thing they're trying to escape is doing the hard work of making their home countries prosperous. The perverted irony is that as a collective, if these people put the same effort into standing their countries up on their feet and making the reforms necessary to make their countries livable as they do fleeing the place, they would already have a paradise all around the world. All of that free money they've been getting from the United States, a lot of these countries, they've just become utterly dependent on all of that free cash so that they never have to generate anything on their own. And now the bill's coming due. The New York Times says Latin American countries would lose several $billions if the bill passes the Senate. But for African nations, where poverty levels are far higher, remittances are even more of a lifeline. According to the Times, in 2024 alone, sub-Saharan Africa received nearly $10 billion in remittances from the United States, which is almost as much as the $12 billion in foreign aid that it received before Trump retook office. In Africa, Nigerians would pay the most under the bill in absolute terms, losing around $215 million. Gambia and Liberia would lose the most as a percentage of gross national income. Gross national income. That's how important waiting for people in the United States to send money home to them is. For both of these countries, around a quarter of their income now comes from remittances. Senegal, which the World Bank ranked the country most dependent on remittances, would also suffer. So in other words, you've had these countries which have taken decades since so-called independence and done nothing to stand their economies on their feet. They've just been waiting for free money to be given to them either by people immigrants in the United States or by the U.S. government itself. That's what the true problem is. The United States is already one of the most expensive places in the world from which to send remittances. Companies that transfer money abroad are taxed, and they pass those taxes on to their customers in the form of fees. Africans already pay more than anyone else according to the World Bank. Well, now it looks like they're about to pay even more. All of this whining and complaining going on has to stop. In fact, truth be told, the orange man is letting these immigrants off easy. See, if he really wanted to get tough with them, what he would do is he would tell each and every one of these wire transfer services that they have to check the immigration status of anybody wanting to send money through them. That's if he wanted to get tough with them. Everyone knows that illegal immigration is big business. It wouldn't even exist if it wasn't for the corrupt businessmen and financial interests who make huge amounts of money off of it. There's an entire economy revolving around it. Dirty money. Banks were the ones who fought to make sure that illegals could open bank accounts with them and to send remittances without having to undergo any checks for whether they're in the country legally or not. And they did it because all they care about are their billions of dollars in wire transfer fees. But since push is coming to shove, if they have to choose between raising their rates to compensate for the tax increase and losing their stream of revenue altogether, they'll play ball. Cutting these countries off is way overdue because using money is part of America's so-called soft power, how America influences other countries without having to use force. Reducing the amount of free money that these countries have been getting from the U.S. is just the kind of thing that might compel them to finally fix their problems. What's gone wrong are successive kleptocrat regimes in these countries, but also a failure of citizenship. Nobody should accept them complaining about how wrong and bad their governments are. When criminals run your town, you have to throw them out. You saw what black voters did with that Hainier woman in Illinois. They didn't flee. Instead, they ganged up on her and threw her out. But tethers can never understand that. Foundational black Americans, we're just built different. You can't Joppa your way to prosperity. That's the lesson to be learned here. But it's clear that a lot of people simply refuse to get the memo. A so-called Ghanaian entrepreneur and philanthropic advisor called the tax an attack on the generosity of the diaspora and said that if it was aimed at curbing immigration, it would probably backfire. When you have financial hardship or economic hardship, it actually drives up migration, she said. Well, economic times are really tough right now, and the Orange Man has managed to bring illegal crossings at the southern border down to a trickle. And I don't think that the Africans can come across the Atlantic in dinghy rafts like they do with Europe. They go to South America and then try to hoof it on foot north. So yes, getting tough on the border works. The Times story also references a woman who got money from her family members in the U.S., which she used to buy a refrigerator, and then she started what I guess for her is a side hustle, basically selling cold drinks. Now, when you have an entire continent that sits on the bulk of the world's mineral resources, how is this kind of thing possible where refrigerators are a luxury that most of them can't afford? What that tells me is the political dysfunction and the refusal of those populations to get on code with each other is a far bigger threat than anything the Orange Man is trying to do. Because the problem here isn't whether or not they can get remittances at a lower price. The problem is that they're hopelessly dependent on remittances in the first place. And if people in Africa are complaining, then I say it's time to finally show the world some of that alleged superior work ethic they've been talking about and build up their home countries. None of them ever tries that. And that's because their loyalty system is totally broken, mainly because they broke it. When they came to the U.S., they didn't try to build bridges with us. Instead, they spat in our faces. But then again, that's what was going on at home, too. And they failed to build bonds among other African and Caribbean immigrants, even abroad. They're all being tribal and factionalized, and by now some of them should have recognized that's not going to work. Remittances are not a sign of success. It's a sign of failure. It's a sign that your economy has failed to the point that you're desperately dependent on somebody else's money. White power has propped up and funded all these forces of anti-black racism, and they're demanding that the hand that's been feeding them continue to feed them regardless. All their bluster about how productive and independent they claim to be is facing cold, hard reality. They're not bragging on themselves anymore. Now they're scared. Same thing with these wannabe white supremacist adjacents in the U.S. One gang of crooks and liars is beefing with another. It's all a scam, a racket. And speaking of scams, it's dishonest to try to make economic dependence sound honorable. These immigrants have swallowed a false narrative that they were indispensable, and we tried to tell them that they were just being played for fools, that their good white supremacist buddies were lying to them, that there's already more people in the U.S. than are needed by the rich or powerful to generate their wealth. They can already make tons of money with far less people. As far as they're concerned, it's time for some of the useless eaters to be sent to the slaughterhouse. But the immigrants from Africa let their new buddies, these white supremacists, feed them a narrative that they were somehow better than us, and that they would make a backroom deal with African and Caribbean migrants, and they would ultimately supplant us. Sure, they wouldn't have our history or cultural significance, But as Joy Reid and other tethers have shown, when these guys talk about our history, they keep on using words like we and us, as if they were part of it, as if it was their ancestors who were taking on the fire hoses and police dogs, as if it was their ancestors who were being lynched and their churches firebombed, as if it was their ancestors who were marching, demonstrating, and taking their demands straight to the White House, as if it was their ancestors whose townships were destroyed by white marauders, as if they were the ones whose ancestors languished in the living hell of America's plantations. This was the entire reason that white power has allowed mass migration in the first place. It was to be a political and demographic counterlever to the demands that were coming from the black population. You would have people who would have a requisite amount of melanin, but they would never speak about any historical grievance because they don't have one in the U.S., and they would be more compliant with the dominant society. That is, until it became time to yank their artificial money and jobs and whatnot and reduce them back to utter impoverishment. And by the way, this phenomenon is not just something in the United States. In Britain, there's a schism between Caribbean Afro-Britons and the Nigerian Afro-Britons, specifically the people from Jamaica vis-a-vis the people from Nigeria. It's not talked about much, but it is there. Caribbean blacks were the largest group of Afro-Britons for the longest time. Many of them went there during the 20th century. And in the last 25 years or so, they too have noticed that there's been a lot of folks with Nigerian names who have been popping up in movies and television programs and even in the government. But they've also noticed that these people are not uniting with them. Instead, they're trying to remain tribal and factionalized. And that's the reason why it is that all of this stuff that white power is doing is never going to have any consequences from the people that they're running into the ground. The man who has the power to give you everything also has the power to take it away. We understood that reality long ago, that there were people who simply didn't want to get it, so we stopped telling them. And now the consequences are playing themselves out. We're going to be seeing a lot more immigrants who are going to be claiming that they were down with the struggle. But that's not going to fool anyone. The African and Caribbean immigrants who have actually been on the side of justice, who have actually been on Team Black Empowerment, they may be a minority, unfortunately, but we do know who they are, and you're not going to be able to blend in with them. People trying to take off the uniform of the tether and put on the uniform of an honorable black immigrant, or worse, trying to palm themselves off as a foundational black American, that simply won't fly. So, for the people who spent years being terrified about the orange man becoming president or getting back into the White House, here's what the results have actually been. It's not because Trump's on our side. No, he's not. But it is a matter of every kind of attack that they would try to do against us, they've already done. It's time for these other groups to actually reap what they've sown. They wanted to be chummy with white supremacy, and this is the result. So many people kept thinking that they were going to find a comfortable place under white supremacy, so they would gladly sell out, lie for the dominant society, and do it for a few crumbs to send back home. And now, maybe some of them are finally realizing, too late, that the only safe place under white supremacy is fighting it. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. Frederica Moore, Schrampstein, Antonio Daniels, Jacques Hargett, and Walter Wilborn. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.